Okay, thank you guys for a wonderful lunch.
But I'm texting my
that was really amazing. The team, that we've met so far, you guys are doing an amazing job doing what you're called to do, but also what God has instilled in you. So you're feeling the part, and you're feeling the exact position that God has you in for right now, with an open heart and an open willingness. It seems to also move into new seasons and new positions and new titles and new areas of life that could actually be even more beneficial to you, even more of a blessing to you. So I think that's really great for everyone in this room, and especially the missions team from this church. So I'm trying to reconnect this thing so that we can make sure and get the slides going again. But this part is going to be basically a sort of a more hands-on and more in-depth tool to give you guys an idea of what it actually takes, what you actually have to do to make your plan, to implement the plan, to kind of get going. A lot of the first half of the morning, as you know, is more like the inspirational stuff. Like, this is where the problem is. This is the setup for where we're at in missions. And what we need to do is establish a plan. We need to create something that actually gets something done, because when you look at the Great Commission and you look at all these statistics, or you look at, here's the church that's equipped, we have the resources, we have the equipment, we have the people and the manpower technically to go and save the world, and yet we see people that are not even giving a full percentage towards, moving people. So you've got the missionaries, because we've got a lot of times we've got missionaries ready to go, people that have been put a burden on their heart, they are being moved by compassion into action, and yet the church that surrounds them, that's supposed to be the sending organization and the fuel behind them, is at a 1. Their level of competency, sometimes their level of commitment, their level of just getting it done, is not matched up with those missionaries. And so that's the thing that we want to address now, is if you don't have a plan, then obviously you're planning to fail. Because without having something written down, plain and clear, so that you guys can attach yourselves to it and get rallied around it, you're planning to fail. You're not going to actually get off the ground, and that's a terrible thing, because we don't want to be part of those statistics that we saw in the last section. It's estimated that over 90% of churches have zero written missions plan in which they are implementing. So how do we get started in changing this situation? First and foremost, which is something that the church at Asheville has done, I feel like they're have gotten their core together. In this material, what they call it is the missions advancement team. So your missions team, or your missions, however each church and each organization always kind of comes up with a name, this is the step-by-step. These are the things that the missions advancement team is responsible for. Until, and I'm going to refer to it as the MAT, M-A-T, until this MAT is activated, all the work of taking the missions program forward will fall on the shoulders of the pastor. We talked about that earlier, where basically we have to have the leadership to cast vision and to implement this process, but it cannot fall solely on leadership. It cannot fall solely on the shoulders of your pastor, because, as Danielle said, they've got a full load already. Their calling and mission is to activate you as the congregation into action. And so part of that is making your missions advancement team truly formed in the first place. So the first assignment for the missions advancement team is to write a mission plan. In creating the missions plan, the pastor serves in more of a visionary or overseeing role, rather than in the development, operational, or maintenance role. The final approval of the plan should still come from the pastor, because obviously that's the whole point, is that everyone's following that leadership, and the approval process will vary based on how you guys have set up, the church specifically has set up that role of governing decisions that way. The operational side of the plan will identify standards, procedures, systems, and policies. It will create processes to carry out the missions vision of the church. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier in the setup, is that processes and policies and standards. You know, in business world, we used to call them the standard operating procedures. It's just a basic set of rules that you adhere to. You know, don't steal the inventory, don't come in late, don't, you know, forget to lock up at the end of the night. It's very standard, basic stuff sometimes, in whether business or ministry. But you'll be surprised that if you don't tell your closer not to lock the, you know, to make sure and lock the door when they leave for the day, they're going to leave it open. At some point, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, I forgot to lock the door," and all of your business is gone. So the same can transfer into the church, because when you fail to plan and you say, "Okay, well, let's just see how this thing goes and let's ride it out," and you know, everybody seems to be kind of connected to this, but we don't really know where everyone fits in. You're going to have somebody that says, "Well, I want to go to this place," or they're going to have someone that says, "Well, we shouldn't do a missions wall in the cafe because that's this or that," or you know, you have to have it all written out so that everyone can see it and say, we're on the same page. We're all understanding what the standard operating procedure is for this mission team because it's written out. It's not something that you have to think about. It's automatic. Okay, so in Habakkuk 2:2, it says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it." And that scripture, you know, I'm sure you've heard before or have been familiar with where that is, but the vision itself is something that's birthed in the leadership. It's something that comes out of their access to missions, their access to the global side of the Great Commission. God stirs it, the Holy Spirit kind of draws it out and pulls it out. And so, you know, there's even some very simple times when it's like when I'm thinking about something, a strategy or something that we do with Connect Global, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and I've always got my phone right next to the bed, and I'll pull it out and I take a note and I say, "Okay, God," you know, because that's what happens. You know, God is always downloading. You don't have to wait and worry and wonder what God's thinking.
Yeah.
He'll tell you if you're tuned in.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's what works best for me, is because it's in a quiet, isolated, you know, no distraction zone of sleep, that it's like, it's an alarm. It's almost an internal alarm sometimes. And I'll grab my phone and I've got a couple of notebooks that I can start taking notes. And sometimes it's downloads for sermons, things that we're talking about. Sometimes it's literal strategy of, man, this is a great idea. How do I make that work? And it's implementing a new missions program, or we're launching a new sort of shirt of the month for Connect Global. Each month is going to be a brand new t-shirt, just like you see there, custom designed, made for 1 month only until it runs out, to gain awareness. And so things like that just hit me, and you think, okay, well, that's a silly thing, or that's this or that, whatever. But it's like, that is going to be what gets someone that may not even know anything about Connect Global. They'll think, hey, that's a cool t-shirt, and let me pick that up. And then there's a story behind it. You know, there's a personal side that we can tell of that story that says, hey, this shirt is special, or we designed this shirt because, you know, to all nations means that was my calling 12 years ago. It wasn't just to Florida, it wasn't just to Texas, it wasn't just to North Carolina, it was to all nations. And so when we open up that globe and we open up that map, that's where we're headed. And so when you write things down, it makes it so clear and so evident, crystal clear to you, but others as well now can have that download and can see that for themselves as well. Okay, so here are 8 practical reasons for the mission plan. Okay, to ensure that the missions outreach of the local congregation is given top priority in prayer, financial support, and involvement in every area of the church. Having that written missions plan sends a statement. It sends a signal and a message to people, hey, we're taking this thing serious and you need to as well. You know, because then it's not just an idea that Kevin had one day, or it's not just an idea that Mark had one day. This is policy. You know, to use a word, you know, a term like that is serious, but it's like, that's what it is. This is a serious business. You know, if we take other endeavors in our lives so serious, and we're going to be there on time, and my word is my bond, and this and that and whatever, and then we scoot into church and we think, wouldn't it be great to start a cafe one of these days? You know, and 2 years and 10 years and 20 years goes by, and never once did you have a space for a missionary to be honored in that way, to represent what is going on in the world. Because you just thought, man, that could be cool one day. but to put a date on it, to put action to it, to have a meeting to organize that, those are the steps. That's what makes it clear and plain for people to take hold of. Number 2, to assist in providing a coordinated missions effort that will be mutually beneficial for both the local church as well as the global harvest. Number 3, to develop and maintain a clear vision of purpose and harmony of effort in all activities that relate to missions in the local congregation. So it says many churches are involved in a number of missions activities, but there is no strategic purpose to what they do. A missions plan will help bring focus and greater effectiveness. Because just like, whether it's the cafe or whether it's a new missions trip or whatever, if you don't have the missions plan, either A, it's never going to happen, and then or B, which is equally as detrimental, you're going to ruin it. And there's so many times where it's like there's so much importance that we have put on this mission, this Connect Global that Danielle and I have co-founded. There's so much time that we put so much importance on, getting things right, because we don't want to, God cannot be made a mockery of, but that's on us too. We have to make sure that when we go out in His name and we represent Jesus Christ and we represent who He is to us, the Savior of the world, we better get it right. We better be on point. We better understand that this thing is important, just as important as anything else, more important than anything else, because it's our literal salvation. It's not a storybook. It's not a fairy tale. It's not something that we read or picked up in Sunday school just one time. It's something that is woven in the DNA of our lives, and to reconnect someone who is lost to their Creator is literally the best thing that you could do in this world. That's literally bridging that gap between the lost and their Creator, and there's no better feeling, there's no better reward, there's no better time to celebrate than something like that. Number 4, sorry, this is going slow. Okay, to help make wise decisions that affect missions in a manner that is consistent and systematic in nature. It'll bring a whole new level of stability and consistency to your missions program. Number 5 is to avoid making important decisions solely based on emotion. Because nobody in here has ever made a decision based on emotion. We have to skip this part, right? No. The reason it's in here is because it happens all the time. You get tied up with the emotion of, the slideshow on Sunday morning. And it's like you see these faces from this other country. You see the joy on the people who just returned from that mission trip. You see all the excitement that went into it. And you think, you know what? I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to move to Honduras. And I'm going to save the world. But you're making an emotional decision at that point. And so having this missions plan, the practical reason for having this mission plan is to avoid that. Yes, sometimes God calls you to do very radical things, and we need to be in tune and listening to that. But because we have a plan, we know whether that's God or us. Because we can look back at the policy, we can look back at the procedure, we can look back at the system, we can tell, is that a God thing, or is that just another good thing to do? Because a lot of times we fall into, well, that's a good, going on a mission trip is a good thing. Leaving and doing, good for someone else is a good way to make their lives better. Why would that be a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing if you're supposed to be at home raising money and support and following your leadership as the plan evolves and not just racing off. And so sometimes God will call you to do those radical things, and we have to listen, we must listen. But we also must listen to what God has already downloaded in us, which has already been put down on paper as the mission plan. So we have to make sure to do that. Number 6 is a big one, to ensure that missions funds, because now we're talking about emotions and money, which is kind of a bad mixture, so that we ensure that missions funds are administered both effectively and faithfully. That's a huge one, because just like, making a decision to forego, the rest of your life to go, be Mother Teresa somewhere, you also have to make sure, is this the right thing for us? Is this the right thing for our church? If you have the missions plan intact, you're going to know. You're going to have Does it meet this criteria? Does it meet this criteria? Does it meet this criteria? And if you have a check or you have, well, it doesn't really meet this, it doesn't really meet this, then you have an answer. You know, it's almost like a litmus test. It's almost like just fill in the blanks, you know. Does this mission trip fit this? Does it look like this? Does it, you know, if it doesn't, that's your answer. You know, because God, we sometimes wait and think, you know, hey, God has already called me, I'm ordained, you just told me for the last 4 hours that I gotta go and I gotta get out of here. Yes, follow God and follow what He's prompting you to do, but do it in a way that is effective and faithful to the original mission, because money, once it goes, it goes. And so if it goes in the wrong direction, it's gone. If it goes in the right direction, it's going to come back and it's going to be what God has called you to. So you've got to remember that. Okay, number 6. Okay, number 7. To inform and equip members of the church to be actively involved in missions on a personal level. It is hard to mobilize a congregation for missions and keep them actively involved without a missions plan. Number 8, to maintain the highest level of accountability in every aspect of missions. This includes everything from the money, the allocation of the funds, to the level of the accountability of the missionaries to the church. This is a good one because this is something that, you know, Danielle and I, I'll go ahead and say we feel very personal to this one because we would never want to be seen as someone who was unaccountable or had zero tolerance for accountability and had, you know, we're just sticks in the wind. Everything we check with board members and other advisors and people that we're close to, and we say, hey, is this the right thing? We adhere to our plan that as an organization we run to. And so this speaks to, there's an example that we heard when we received this teaching for the first time of a pastor, this church who had been getting zero reports. Like they're giving this money, they knew the bank account to deposit the funds for this missionary in Central America somewhere, and they were faithful. You know, in this case, they were at the 10. They were like, we've sent you, we've established the plan, and we're going to continue to contribute to this. So every month, like clockwork, they're just sending checks, making sure, you know, that everything is there. And lo and behold, a month would pass and no correspondence. 2 months would pass, no correspondence. 3 months would pass, no correspondence. So the church is thinking, man, we're giving faithfully, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. You know, what's happening, what's going on. You know, there's no communication anymore, it's a broken communication. So the missions conference comes around, so a time like this, and where they're gathering their missionaries that they've sent out. This missionary person comes in and says, you know, here I am to represent the mission that you've sent me on, and this and that. And so, well, you know, what's going on? We haven't heard from you in a few months. Oh, okay, well, let me catch you up. So since you've sent me out there, I've become divorced. I married a woman from the village, and, you know, we're doing great. So I appreciate your monthly support. You know, and it's like, you know, you're like, wait a minute, what happened? You know, this pastor has to be thinking, oh, Lord, how do I explain that at the board meeting? You know, how do I explain that to the missions team? How do I explain that to, you know, God, who I'm accountable to? You know, so you look at examples like that, and those are, you know, it's like we roll our eyes and think, oh, Lord, please never let that happen to us. But we have so many people that we know that something just like that has happened. Adultery or, you know, sin or some other form of attack from the devil has grabbed a hold of somebody because there was no accountability. There was no back and forth communication. There was no reporting. There was no updating. There was no, you know, and the pastor can only do so much because they think, well, we're sending you money. You're cashing the checks. But you're not responding back to this. You're not you know, it's a mutual sort of accountability. We have to be accountable to send and to go and to put, but as a missionary, you know, as missionaries, to have this plan in place means that you're going to circumvent the possibility of something like that happening, something bad that's going to deter from the mission. It's going to take you took 10 steps forward and now you've taken 20 back because now you've got to replace your ministry. You know, something has to happen. Now you're ministering to your missionary, you know, which is important too, but it's like that's so far from the plan. So that's why that's another practical reason for the missions plan. Okay, so how do we get started in writing our missions plan? with most tasks, getting started is always half the battle, but writing a missions plan seems too intimidating for some churches. Churches will wrestle with the questions like, well, what should the missions program address? What format should I use? Who should be involved in the process? So to make the process even simpler, this is a written prototype of a mission plan that is going to be included in the diagram or in the printouts that you, as your mission team forms and gets together, will be able to write out, will be able to clearly use a proven example, a proven template in building out this form. I think it says the blueprint's on page 55. It starts there. Do you have that, Kevin?
See.
Okay. So the written prototype of a missions plan is included in there. It's on page 55. And it's a blueprint for writing your missions plan. This is something that you still have to input and put your DNA into, and you have to be able to get your organization wrapped around. But this is a start. This is a very, very good, full-on start for your missions plan. It is important for the church to understand that you're not bound to this prototype in any way. It is just a template from which you can start. The missions advancement team is designed to customize this prototype plan to meet your needs at this church and the vision that you guys have already put in place. So you'll take all the sections, you customize it to what you guys have already talked about. You guys have already been having meetings and you have your own binder that is where you start putting everything into. And that's what you have to refer back to. You have to come back to that blueprint every time. Okay, so the development and the approval process may be adjusted to fit your leadership. You guys have kind of gone through a lot of that. So let's go to this one. Okay, so the missions plan prototype is designed with two main parts. One is it's to be formative. This deals with the structural development of the missions program. In section 1, what you're going to see is it's raising up a missions director, who is Kevin. So you are, just to use the Church of Asheville as an example, you've raised up, you've said, okay, who are we supposed to put at the top of this organized team in order to achieve all this, achieve the goals and set parameters and set policies and make dates happen. And so that's part of doing that, is making sure that they're qualified, committed, and that they're going to do a good job doing that. Creating your missions advancement team, you'll know the purpose of the team, you'll know the structure, how to set it up, how it relates to your church. You'll set meetings, you'll set organized meetings, you'll set the length of what you're going to do, and make sure that everyone that comes in, that you've qualified them. So everyone that you've already added, you've qualified in some way. You've said you're interested in this, or you've done this, or you've been here since whenever, and you have used your qualifications to bring them in, and that's what you have to do. You have to make sure that each person adds value to that missions team, because you're growing something and you're starting something that is of the greatest importance, and so you want to make sure that everyone can connect to that in the right way.
So the Church of Asheville does have a missions team. It's Mark and Mindy and Beth and Janice, but like Debbie was asking earlier, I'd like to be part of your core team. Just because this is a missions team doesn't mean more people won't be involved, more people will be able to volunteer to be involved. So the team is actually broader than just the physical missions advancement team that may be doing the nuts and bolts. It'll be a broader group of folks within the church that meets and volunteers to fulfill the mission.
That's good. Yeah, and so that's one thing that we don't want to miss here. We're talking, to part of the group who's already kind of organized. This is built in a format to address anyone's interest and anyone's sort of like, okay, I'm trying to understand, why do we need a missions team? That's what this covers. This is sort of the baseline of understanding what it takes to get a church from being a church to being a Great Commission church. And so, yes, like he said, it takes a village, it takes the whole team, it takes the whole congregation, and so that's what we talked about in the first part of the morning, is that it doesn't rely just on the pastor, it doesn't just rely on the one that gets excited about missions, it relies on everyone. And so as Kevin and the team determine throughout the year, hey, here's what we need, here's a piece that needs filling, they're going to ask you to volunteer, they're going to ask you to give up your time and your efforts and your resources, because it takes everyone. It's going to take all of us, hands on deck, full, to make this thing happen. And so The core team is what we're talking about, the missions advancement team, the ones that are going to have sort of the full-time, all in. That's what we're kind of addressing now. But know that you're going to be called upon to be a part of this, because that's what it takes. It takes the whole body. So section 3, the primary focus of the missions advancement team, just deals with creating missions and making it a part of the DNA of every part of the church, which means children are involved. It means, your cafe is now a new involved member of this thing. Everything has to be clicking. Missions has to be on the mind of every program that you do in some way. And we'll talk about it later, I think, in the next section of how you actually do that and how it actually would look. Some examples of that. So number 4 says the responsibilities of the mission advancement team. 7 primary responsibilities are listed there, I think. And the functional responsibilities will be a part of that, understanding that whole system and how that works. And then the next part is, so that was formative. So the second part is operational. This deals with the definition, the function, the processes, and the reporting of this. And so number 5, let's see, section 5 of that, those pages, will help give your missions program definition. When you say missions, people will understand what that means. Because we talked about it before, the nomenclature or the wording that sometimes church-goers use is very different than non-church goers.
Right.
And it may even be like if you have a new church member, it may be very different than what they've grown up hearing or understanding or listening to. And so that deals with actually defining it for everyone, understanding, hey, does everyone know what we mean when we say missions? It's not exclusively, Asheville. It's not exclusively Honduras. It's everything. So you're going to be able to define all of that for everyone involved. Number 6 goes over financial policies, which is amazing. Deals with how you will raise, oversee, and use the mission funds of the church, because that's very, very important. Number 7 lays out the policy for the selection and function of your missionaries. Again, that's one of the big ones for us. This section will help answer questions like what missionaries should the church support, what's the selection process, what types of mission works do you support, and what are the guidelines for appropriate missionaries to bring them back home. Like they call furloughs. So like you sent somebody out, they've been out for 6 months, 9 months, a year. What's the protocol for bringing them back home to get re-energized, to get re-fed into, to get recommitted and recalibrated to then go back out? And that's very important, because we see a ton of missionaries through our work and through our business, when we see others where they just get burnt out. Full-time work, in certain sectors and certain areas is full-time work. Full-time mission work it's full-time, and there's no way to turn it off. There's no way to disengage even for a minute. There's no way to, separate. It's almost like it's part of me, because I'm a very compartmentalized kind of person. I want to be able to say, well, when I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm at home, I'm at home. But as a missionary, that never works. I'm a missionary 24 hours a day. We have trouble separate, not trouble, but it's like you can't pull those things apart. Once you've ingrained yourself in a life of missionhood and in a life of serving in that position, you can't tear it apart. It's like Danielle said, when you become a pastor, you don't really pull apart from the church. You don't really separate from the church. Here, you don't even hardly separate from the parking lot. So on some level, you're always connected to your mission when you're in full-time ministry. And so that's very important when you start looking at this policy for how you select missionaries, how you select the length of their deployment, how you select the length of their furlough. All of that stuff goes into building out this operational side of the plan. All right, so let's see. Okay, so the next part is section 8 that says, establishes guidelines on how the church and your missionaries interface with other missions agencies. This section establishes proper protocol concerning what are the responsibilities of the sending church to the missionary or the agency, what are the responsibilities of the missionary, like we talked before, how often do they need to report back to you and let you know what's going on there, what are the responsibilities of the mission agency or the sending, to the sending church or to the ministry, missionary, what are the responsibilities of other churches? You know, other people like we talked about. You know, maybe this is a conglomerate. Maybe this becomes something where, hey, we've got a couple of different churches. We can do more. We can expand this thing. And your missions team, you know, connects with their missions team, and you say, well, what are we going to do together? That was one of the things that helped form Connect Global in the early, you know, months of what we were doing, is because we had good, solid, foundational relationships with several churches that, you know, were easy to jump on board. We said, hey, we think we're going to start hosting missions teams. You want to send people with us? And they're like, sure, we'll do that. You know, and so little by little, we started learning, how do we do this? How do we implement this plan that we've made and make it real? And the biggest, you know, help to do that was seeking out other people, getting other people that were already slanted towards missions or understood it, and just saying, hey, we need to work together. You know, the first mission trip that Danielle said that she fell in love with me on was a trip of 3 or 4 different combined forces where we reached out to each other and said, hey, I can do this much, you can do this much, but when we come all together, we're going to, you know, really do this thing. So they, from their church, brought a semi-trailer, you know, one of the 50-foot trailers full of canned water. You know, something that was just because the systems there were just completely shot. You couldn't get sewer and plumbing for weeks and weeks and weeks after the hurricane. And so having, you know, I don't know how many, probably 30,000 cans of water is amazing, you know. And it's something that I wouldn't have even had a connection to. I didn't know how they got it. But I called them and I said, hey, we're going on these dates, can you come? And they said, yep, and we know this guy that bottles or cans water, you know, and so we said, we coordinated it all, and it showed up before we got there, and we're sitting there, and we had love, you know, it's like, when you start clicking, and you start doing this plan, you'll see that God already had it planned out, and all you're doing is jumping in.
That's good.
That's it. Okay, so the missions advancement team should also develop operational procedures. This should be one of the main or the primary responsibilities of your missions advancement team. The reality is, as we all know, that if something does not get scheduled, it will not happen. That was something that we talked about, you know, or that I mentioned about this cafe. If you just talk about something or you just kind of present something, but there's no action behind it, you know, you may as well have just kept your mouth shut, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to get off the ground. And it's scary sometimes, you know, because you throw something out there and you say, hey, I'm going to move to Honduras for a year. And then people are like, when do you leave? And I'm like, in 2 weeks. And they're like, oh, okay, great. You know, and it's like, now you're on the fire. Now you're on it. You know, and it's a good feeling, and it's a faith-building feeling. And it's something that you say, okay, I've put it out there. I've talked about this. I've said, you know, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're, you know, making it happen. And it's, you know, it's crazy. So that's the operational procedures. It says here too, let's see, I'm kind of behind on the slide, sorry. Okay, so the annual missions calendar is also something that you have to make sure that is of paramount importance. I think this is, you know, amazing that you guys have said, okay, this is our start of our, you know, mission sending, you know, everything culminates with this new missions, missions weekend, and that is going to be important to stay committed to year after year after year. There's a church I mentioned, I think earlier, in Louisiana, and that they have a huge missions conference in September of 50 to 80 missionaries, families, and singles, and different people that have just said, hey, I'm going to go, and somehow that church has found out about them, and they said, I'm going to give to you, or I'm going to start supporting, or I'm going to do something to stay engaged with you. And then throughout the year, both the missionary and that church stay connected, stay accountable to each other, report back and forth. There's an amazing group of people that we've met over the years in the leadership of that church, that when we walk in that building, it's just like here. You guys are serving, taking care of it. It's the same thing. So you guys are doing the same things. And it's so important because you're connecting two missionaries on a, you know, when it's one, it's amazing. When it's 100, it's 100 times more amazing. You know? And so when you start with one, that's the thing. When you start with one and you say, here's our missions weekend, here's our first missions conference, That's amazing.
Yeah.
In 10 years or 15 years or 20 years from now, when you guys look back and you think, remember that scruffy dude that came in and talked and wouldn't stop talking? Remember that when we did that, and now look at what we've done. We've launched 100 missionaries, or we've done this, or we've been to this country, or we've done this. And the missions cafe will become like a missions, fellowship hall. And it'll extend out into the congregation, it'll extend out into the city, it'll extend out into the world, because people are going to look at you and they're going to say, wow, something's pretty amazing is going on over there, and look where it started.
Right.
So that's amazing to commit to the calendar, to make sure that it's going to happen, and to stay on top of that. Let me see, I wanted to go over a few more things. Okay, a vision without a plan of execution is no more than an elusive dream. And that's a pretty powerful statement for me, because that's something like with what Danielle and I have done over the years is, the way I look at it is it's an honor and it's a privilege and it's all those good feeling things that we want to say in church to incite, good feelings about missions. But it's also challenging, because like I said, when you put yourself out there and you say, yeah, I'm going to go do it. I have a calling on my life. I have this feeling or this urging to move into a direction that would make me no money, make me very uncomfortable, make me, question, what we're doing, and question sometimes even your own faith and understanding of what God has called you into. And we're supposed to be excited about it. We're supposed to be in full mode, full speed ahead. When people see us, they're like, you guys are so amazing, and I don't feel amazing today. And it's both, at one time, it's both the greatest joy in the world, and it's also the greatest challenge that I've ever faced.
Right.
And so that to me is one of the things that you guys have to understand, that a vision without a plan of execution is no more than a dream. Because if we would have stopped at that first time that I heard that missionary describe Kasuna and thought, wow, that's a great story, that's a great, feeling, that's a great kind of emotion, crying a little bit, understanding what it took for them to do that, and then just go back to work and go back to Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and never do anything about it, well, then all I would be thinking about for the last 12 years is like, I wonder what happened to that village.
Yeah.
I wonder what happened to this place. And and it's not to say that we are, some sort of great Mother Teresa to this village, but it's like, in some ways, we're so connected to some of these people that it's like, I couldn't imagine missing out on that. You know what I mean? And so to me, there's that part, and then there's also the elusive part of the dream where it's like, okay, so I'm leading my family, and we're going through this together, and we're, a conversation came up the other day, and I said, my wife has sacrificed more than I am because I'm having the time of my life. I've created this job, I've created this mission, I've created this organization, It went from cocktail napkins that I probably still have somewhere that we were scribbling out, what are we going to call this thing? Where are we going to go? Who do we know? What's a website? All of these things that we were trying to figure out in the beginning. And it's like, so to me, I feel torn sometimes, because it's like, it's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Because not only is it a fun job, and it can be rewarding and all this kind of stuff, but it's the job. It's going and telling someone who may not ever have even had an iota of information about who God is. Their father wasn't there, their mom wasn't there, they've been left in a dumpster somewhere. That was their start. And then somewhere along the lines, her and I walked in the room and sat with them and heard their story, heard what they've been through, and did nothing more than cry with them, sit with them, listen to them, hug them, and somehow we're the greatest thing that ever happened. And the reason we are is because it's not us that showed up.
Right.
It's not Javi, it's not Danielle, it's not Sage that showed up, it's God who showed up.
Yes.
And so when you start to look at missions that way, there's no reason to sit in this room. you have to get together. You have to organize. You have to write down this plan. You have to write down a strategy because it's so important. When you look at life and when you look at people, not as another person, not as just another human, but you look at them as a son of God. You look at them as a lost son of God.
Yes.
You know, there's times when we'll be, anywhere, and my kid goes, where I can't see her. She'll make a corner too fast, or, I'm looking at that column back there in the room. It's like if she goes beyond that column, and just the column hides her silhouette from me, there's a tiny fear that drops on top of me that says, whoa, where's my kid? And so I look at that little feeling in me and I think, wow, how big is the feeling that my God has for me?
Yes.
How big is it for Julio or Yini or any of these people that we've met? Sandra, who lost her son to cancer. When I'm explaining to her, but we're missionaries. We're here to see you. We're here to love you. We're here to hug you. And all she wants to know is, why did my kid die?
Yeah. Yeah.
At that moment, I have the tiniest glimpse, the tiniest inkling of what God must feel. What God must feel every single day. Because as God looks out on this world, on this globe, and He sees every creation, you have to understand that God breathed life into each person on this planet. And so when He looks out and He sees these people in this remote, dark, conflicted village, and He sees nobody from the church has come to see them. He says, here they are, they're sitting there on Sunday morning in their building, in their city. They were complaining about traffic on getting to church. They were complaining about the snowdrifts. They were complaining about the sewer lines, because they couldn't get into their flooded parking lot. And here's this person that I created, that I breathed life into. My child is here waiting for someone to show up. When we start to look at missions in that way, it's not a dream anymore. It can't be. We can't lose sight of it. We can't let it be just something that we thought of one day. It can't be something that we read on a pamphlet one day. It can't be something that we just heard somebody explain or understand one day. It has to be everything that we think about, everything that we breathe, everything that we eat, drink, sleep. Everything has to be about that plan, because that's God's kid. And just like when I see Sage run around a corner and I can't see her for a split second, and I have that worried father like, oh my gosh, is she going to run out the door? Is she going to run into the street? Is she going to do this or that or whatever? Magnify that times 8 billion people, and 2/3 of them never even hearing their father's voice. Never even understanding that they are not orphans, not understanding that they're not cut off, that there is a way to be reconciled, that there is a way to feel taken care of and have a father and have, inheritance. And yet, they're still waiting. Today, somewhere, there's 2.5 billion people waiting for us. Waiting for us to build a plan, waiting for us to get our marching orders, waiting for us to read Matthew 28 one more time, waiting for us to look down at our shirts and read what it says, and then do it. There's 2.5 billion people right now waiting for you and I and all of us to do something about it. And so when we start to look at missions like that, there's no possible way that we let that thing slip through our fingers. There's no possible way that this becomes a drifting, elusive dream. There's no way that we can allow any more time to pass before we say, you know what, we've got to organize, we've got to get together, we've got to put this thing into motion, because there's 2.5 billion people that are waiting on us to do it.
Yes.
And so God right now is weeping, and He's understanding that, hey, I've got children who've heard my voice, who've heard the stories, who've heard the marching orders, they've seen it in action, and so now they just have to act.
Right.
You know, and so just as heartbroken as He is to see the lost, how overjoyed is He when we go and we sit with that mom and we sit with Sandra and we say, you know what, I don't understand. I don't understand why kids get cancer. I don't understand why, you know, everything is stacked against you. But I'm here.
Right.
You know, and I can tell you that God has some infinite way that we can't understand to make all of this work for His good.
Yes.
You know, He didn't take your son, but He's going to use this scenario, this situation, to grow you, to grow your family, to grow this relationship. And so the next time we see Sandra, I know she'll have a smile on her face that's a little bit different. Maybe it's smaller, maybe it's not as prominent. But when we see her again, she'll be smiling at us because we represent Christ.
Yes.
So when we show up, it's not Danielle and Javi and Sage. It's God.
Yes.
It's Jesus. It's the face of her Creator
Yes.
coming to her and saying, even though your son is gone, your hope is not gone.
Right.
Because I'm taking his place.
Yes.
And that is the most important thing that you and I can do, is to understand that God is waiting for us to go and to do.
Amen. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
Okay, so discussion questions are, who knows, I can't even read anymore. Okay, why is a written missions plan important? And don't just steal what I just said. I'm just kidding. Why is a written missions plan so important? Get with your small groups, turn your chairs around, dig into this for the next few minutes, because this right here, if you understand this question and you understand why this thing is so important, like I said, there will be there's no option but to move forward. And so you guys have to come up with, why is this thing so important, okay?
So one of the biggest things that came up in our group was the need to communicate the plan. So that people having a written plan allows you to communicate to other people in the church and also people outside of the church. To like if somebody from the secular world comes up to you and like, why are you going out? Why are you doing this? You know, you have a solid foundation. You can tell them exactly what you're doing, and also just being prepared for something as important as this is always a good idea.
So that's good. That's really good.
You want to say about this?
That was an elaborate setup.
Our group came up with, it's easy to get distracted, and the plan pulls everyone together. You have a concrete something to work with, and it's not being changed constantly when it's written down.
Nice. That's really good.
I got the worst one. So we all sat there and said, yes, of course you need a plan. Without a plan, what would you know? But actually the plan lets you know where you're going. And if you don't know where your goal is, if you don't write your goal, you won't get to where you need to be.
Yes.
That's true.
We had a lot of discussion over there. Why is a written plan important? It keeps you focused. I'm a list person.
Yes.
I'm a procrastinator. I'll get it out in a minute. And as long as I've got a list to go by, I can go back to it. If I get distracted with this or get distracted with that, I'll come back to it. Everything in that number 3 packet that we just got, we're already doing with the mission advancement team. And we come in, we have discussions, we decide what we're going to do. Kevin makes an outline for it. Yesterday, we've got it all written down back there. Every step you take, it was all planned out. And look what's happening. And it also gives accountability. It's just like he said, if you hear it and don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And when you've got it written down and you know you're supposed to do it, it's just right there. You can't let it go.
Yes.
Amen.
Let everyone.
Yeah.
Right. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys very much. That, as you see, the discussion points, again, bring you into a place where you're pulling out the answers from your own experience, self, the heart, what you've listened to. You're putting it all together and you're understanding the concepts that we're talking about on a deeper level. So even though this missions team is already doing, you've already got this going on, you're going to understand why you're doing the outlines. You're going to understand why you have that big blue binder. You're going to understand what each of those pages means on a deeper level, now having gone through this program and hearing it firsthand. And so the ones, if you've not been involved in that process, you're understanding what they've been going through. You're understanding what they're putting together. So when you hear that the missions team has come together and has created all of this, or now you know a little bit, you've seen behind the curtain a little bit, and you understand, man, it takes work. It takes sticking to it, getting down to the paperwork and outlines and all that kind of stuff. But now you understand why it's so important, because you're getting the full-on, hands-on experience of what goes into making something like this happen. Because like we said, if we fail to plan, then we're going to plan to fail. So, okay, let's take a short break.
8 or 9 minutes, be back at 3.
3, okay?